I don't have a picture. Thursday, February 16th, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee. I'd like to call this, tonight will be following on the published and post agenda. Participation tonight will be through both Zoom and in person. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the October 6th, 2022. Has everyone had a chance to review them? February 16th,
Yep.
2023
Yes.
meeting of the Finance Committee. All right. Do I have a motion?
I move that we accept the meeting minutes.
Okay. Have a second?
I second it.
Okay. I think we're going to do the roll call vote, considering we're mostly via Zoom for various reasons this evening. So, Kathy? You're
You're muted, Kathy.
All those, you're still muted, Kathy.
Jesus.
Oh, I abstain. I'm sorry. I'm gonna keep myself unmuted, but I'll try to be quiet.
Fair enough. All right, John?
Aye.
Anita?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Cindy?
Aye.
And I'll approve them. And Sam is currently absent. He'll be joining us in a little bit. All right. Next on our agenda this evening is a review and discussion of the town manager's draft fiscal year 2024 recommended operating budget and draft annual spring town meeting warrant articles. There'll also be a discussion intertwined with that of the fiscal year 2024 recommended capital plan. With us this evening, we have Paul Cohen, our town manager, John Souza, our finance director, and Darlene Lucier, our town accountant. Good evening.
Great, good evening. Good to see everybody, and thank you for giving us the opportunity this evening to present our budget. At the outset, I think the thing that's most noteworthy and what we want to stress is the uncertainty that we have at this point in time. And we talked about this when we had the tri-board meeting a couple months ago. As we are here this evening in mid-February on the 16th, we're sort of in an unusual spot, and it's because of the change in the governor's position at the State House. Under the governing schedule at the State House, when a new governor is seated, they provide an extended period for the new administration to release its proposed budget. Normally, we'd have the budget towards the end of January, but with a new seated governor, they allow that person until March 1st. We were told by the governor when she appeared before the Mass Municipal Association 3 weeks ago that she would provide advance notice of the local aid numbers in advance of her March 1st release of the budget. As of today, that has not occurred, and we don't expect it's going to happen certainly before the holiday Monday, and it may not. We don't know how many days it may come before the advance of the budget. So with that, what that does, and you've also seen this if you followed the Neshoba Tech budget process, it creates an uncertainty in terms of state aid that would support either the regional school district or the town, not only in Chapter 70 education funding, but all the other state aid assessments and revenues that are provided to the town in issues that range from charter school tuition assessments to mosquito assessments to, whatever charges that are coming from the state. And those can vary in the tune of a few $100,000 in the case of Chelmsford. And yes, we're running a $155 million proposed budget, but it really does affect the margins because, we really are up against Proposition 2.5 and so forth. And so with that uncertainty, we still have to proceed. And so what we can tell you and what I'll present to you this evening and what we've distributed you by email is the departmental budgets will remain unchanged regardless of what transpires. We have sat through, meaning John and I have sat with the department heads, reviewed the budgets. What you're seeing is a level service budget almost a continuation budget, for lack of a better word. There are no net new positions in the community. We're really adjusting the inflationary cost, whether it's from the retirement board assessment or health insurance or the cost of living agreements that are provided under the personnel wage schedules or the union contracts. And with that being said, we still have a number of unresolved collective bargaining agreements, and that's really where any of the variance will end up coming. And I think we even talked about this, going back in fall town meeting about what to do with the town's free cash and so forth and cash reserves. But I think the good news is in what's a rather extreme inflationary period, we're sort of, I think, holding steady. And I think that's a good thing is what you'll see in this budget, and I think what John and Darlene can attest to, is we're not living beyond our means and we're not relying on one-time revenues. So therefore, we're not facing a cliff that you may be hearing about in other communities that are sort of maybe relying for either school districts or some other municipalities, both in the state and in other states, for their operating purposes. So with that as a long-winded prelude, I'll sort of dive into the essence of the budget. As I mentioned, it's a $155.5 million budget, which is roughly a 4% budget increase. The thing to note is we're recommending $70.7 million for the Chelmsford Public Schools, and I did send you out the link the other day. The Superintendent Lang has released his proposed school budget, and the school committee is holding a public hearing on the 28th of this month to review the $70.7 million school budget. And so I think that, and an interesting thing in that is, and we'll get into it in a little detail, is his is essentially a level service, and in fact, his staffing actually slightly declines. And we've got some fixed cost increases, which are really driving everything, which is, and many of these we'll discuss, are not unexpected in a high inflationary environment, because the same things that residents and businesses and others are addressing, such as fuel costs, inflationary costs, labor shortages, and so forth, are obviously impacting cities and towns. What makes it challenging in Chelmsford is that we're constrained by 2.5% of the levy increase under Proposition 2.5. That is not indexed or adjusted or modified by inflation. So we're sort of really meeting it tough when inflation's running now at over 6%. So, and the other thing I want to note on that slide, and you can see it, is right now we're in a situation where the Chelmsford Public School budget is roughly twice the amount of the general government budgets of the town. So the school budget's running just over $70 million, and the general government departments of the town, meaning, police, fire, DPW, administrative offices and so forth, we're running at just over $35 million. And then obviously Neshoba Tech I've got budgeted a $3.9 million assessment. Their proposed assessment was $12,000 under that, but again, there's uncertainty in that number because they're going to revise the budget once the governor's budget comes out, because that gives a baseline or a floor, which in the past the legislature has never gone below. And so that's why everyone's waiting for those numbers, because they sort of become, sort of a worst case scenario. And I think that's the uncertainty, is the legislature has done a revenue projection. They're only projecting a 1.6% increase in state revenues for the upcoming fiscal year. And that's where you're getting a lot of jockeying going on with cities and towns now, because they're saying, well, wait a minute, we don't want you to continue the metric where you'll increase our unrestricted general government aid by the same percentage of the growth in the state budget, because 1.6% isn't going to cut it in this climate. And also, what has happened to the state is their budget has grown well above, in recent years, the forecasted revenues that are set for the budget release, and yet the unrestricted general government aid wasn't really compensated to match. So, again, the other big thing to note is benefits and insurance are, $30 million, and that's a $2 million increase, or almost 7%. The good news is the town's debt service continues to decline. Our debt service out of a $155 million budget is only $11 million, and that's dropping by $500,000 or 4.8%. And obviously, the reasons for that is we're continuing to pay off the debt service, particularly excluded debt from the sewer project, and the town has not added any significant capital projects in recent years. And we'll see where we go forward. All right, so again, I'll move through some of these real quickly. You've heard this many before, but I'm trying to provide this for those who may be watching. Government services are maintained. There's no change in positions, and our capital infrastructure, which John is going to describe later, is $4.4 million. Our priorities remain the same: education, public safety, capital infrastructure, and health and human services. On the budget line item increases, again, when you look at the budget going up by almost $6 million, again, more than half of that is the Chelmsford Public Schools at 3.2. Public safety and public works, largest town departments are where the money goes. Over $600,000 or almost 700 in public works. And again, we'll talk about public works. Most of that's being in the new trash contract because, again, you're paying higher fees for labor and contracted services. Benefits insurance that I noted earlier is up almost $2 million. And again, our debt service, we declined. Sadly, the revenue summary, the additional available revenue in any increases, and they just sent out a message in any increases, and they just sent out a message within the last couple of days to financial officials and others in the towns, reemphasizing that point amongst other things. And then our available funds are going down, and I can get into that a little later. That's our fourth revenue source. So, again, I tend to look at 5-year and 10-year experiences to give people in the community a sense of, well, why did taxes keep going up, and where is the additional money going? Well, the money goes to where the big spending areas of the town are, and which are the priorities, as I mentioned earlier. Schools are up almost $12 million in 5 years. Neshoba Tech, is leveling off in terms of the assessment increases, but they're up significantly in 5 years. And again, $3 million in public safety, $1.85 million in public works, and then benefits insurance up almost 30% in 5 years. And again, our debt service declining by over 22% or $3.2 million in 5 years. And then in 10 years, you're seeing a similar pattern. In the last 10 years, we've put over $21 million in the school budget appropriation, public safety, facilities, benefits insurance up by 2/3 in a 10-year period, mostly driven by health insurance and retirement assessment, which are two major, cost drivers. So, again, it's you've got a fifth of the budget going towards benefits at this point in time. So moving on to the particular appropriated budget, again, it's a public schools, as I mentioned earlier, is $70.7 million or 4.74 budgetary increase. Again, without adding material staffing, and we'll get into that a little later. Here's the funding over the recent years. You can obviously, see that, obviously we had the anomaly with 2021 with the COVID year. But if you sort of average that out between 22, we were averaging about $2.5 million. That extra $700,000, I'll get into this later, is really doing with special education tuition increase that's being granted by the state. And again, that's not a local discretion cost. That's directed and approved by the state government. And so, again, looking at state education funding, and you can see it's been rather paltry, running certainly below inflation when inflation was running at 2% and plus in recent years, up until last year when the legislature stepped up at the end of the day and gave a 5.41% because money was flush at the State House. Again, we don't know the number for 24, but I think clearly it may not be that amount. Moving on to what's our required spending in terms of net school spending or our required school spending, you can see that right now we're about over a third above the required amount that we're under the Massachusetts laws. So we're in fiscal 23, the current fiscal year, our budgeted net school spending is over $80 million. The state says we must spend at least $59 million. So again, we're $21 million above that, and again, we'll know more. They'll release the required in 24 once the state governor's budget comes out. And stop me for questions at any point in time if there are issues. Then I just go into a little bit of statistics in terms of giving people a sense of what things cost in governmental services on the next slide, on slide 14. We are now expending, the most recent figures, over $17,000 per student in the Chelmsford Public Schools. in fiscal year '21. Now, that was a bit of an anomaly, and that was because people withdrew from the schools and did homeschooling and then sometimes left for private schools. That's why you see such an extraordinary jump in that year. But again, if you then move that forward a couple years, you're probably around that number, for school expenditures in the current time. And then, so again, you're trying to put that, what does that mean, $17,000 per student? Well, if you had 180 school days, it's costing you about $95 a day per pupil. And if you put 22 kids in a classroom at 17,000, it's costing you $374,000 for a classroom, or $2,000 per day in a classroom. So again, it's significant. I know when people sort of look at, well, gee, I pay $8,000 in taxes. Well, if it's costing a 17,000 educate a student, it kind of puts it into perspective. And the other thing is we like to look at, well, how are we doing compared to our peer communities? The state identifies the peer communities on an annual basis. Those are the top communities that are listed there. And then I add the data for our neighboring communities to give a sense of where we are perspective-wise. And it's probably best to put it into the chart form. And you can see Chelmsford falls below the midpoint in terms of per pupil expenditure. So you've got a community which is, Burlington, which has an extraordinary commercial tax base. They're spending over $24,000 per pupil. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got Drake that's spending $13,600 in the most recent fiscal year '21 dollars. So when Chelmsford's spending over $17,000, you can see it's below the midpoint of our comparable communities as identified by the state. Other metrics, enrollment, again, and teachers and so forth. And you can see right now where our student-teacher ratio is 13. You can see the spike of enrollment that came back in '22 after the pandemic year. And so, again, we're faring well. When you look at, again, our peer communities, in terms of enrollment and student-teacher ratios, you see the data, and then once again, on a chart form, we're actually above the midpoint in terms of student-teacher ratio. So again, Burlington being the lowest, and then Drake at the other end. So again, we're not even amongst the midpoint of our comparable communities. Average class size, we're down to 17.8. Again, the data for our comparable communities puts us in. And if you look at it in the graphical thing, we're actually towards the lower end in this one. So it almost indicates that the Chelmsford's putting its money into the classrooms in terms of average class size when you look at per pupil and other expenditure. Because again, Burlington having the slowest class size and Melrose having the highest in this metric. When you see the school department's budget and when we discuss with the superintendent their cost drivers, again, it's labor. Right? You've seen a lot of, if you've watched the media recently about what happened in Woburn and then the teacher disputes of contracts in Haverhill and these other communities, it comes down to labor costs. Fortunately, the school committee has reached agreement with all of its labor unions, but when you provide the 2.5% cost of living adjustment in the contracts, they then have their step increases for people who have more seniority, and then people who get different degrees and change their category lane. And then also there are some annual retirement incentives. That's where the bulk of the money goes. I mean, there's almost $2.3 million right there of the 3.2. And then the other big one that you see is out-of-district special education tuition. Right now, the state has given preliminary approval for a 14% increase in out-of-district special education tuitions. And this keeps getting pushed back to the governor saying, can you help us? Because how do communities, not just Chelmsford, but imagine any community, whether it's Brockton, Fall River, North Adams, a rural community, how do you absorb a 14% increase in special education costs? And then your others, your utility costs, your special student regular transportation, because obviously the busing costs are going up. The fees aren't, but the costs are going up, and then the special education transportation as well. Neshoba Tech, again, their preliminary numbers are out. I've budgeted at 3.9, which is a 4.6%. Their preliminary numbers at 3.888. So again, we're right in the ballpark. Our enrollment in Neshoba Tech increased by 5 students, so we're still the largest sending community at 212. but their overall member enrollment, meaning those communities that are members in Neshoba Tech, that increased by 25. So their member enrollment has increased to 713. And then once again, if you've seen either the presentation or the materials, they're not allowing school choice students in for a second year in a row. And quickly, school choice in 2 more years will not be a factor in the district because they just don't have the space. And that's a statewide trend of special education demand where there are waiting lists and real concerns by communities that aren't members of regional school districts in terms of access to education. So again, our share of the Neshoba Tech district has decreased from 30.13% down to 29.73%. And so again, we'll see where this plays out in the weeks ahead, because again, they'll adjust the Neshoba Tech budget in a couple of weeks. So again, you see the enrollment numbers from Chelmsford. We're up to 212, which is our high point that equals where we were in 2022 fiscal year. They also noted, I know this was the thing, we didn't receive any post-grads or anything else, so that's where we are at Neshoba Tech. And then, obviously, we're in Neshoba Tech as a high school only, and costs are greater at the high school, and particularly a vocational high school. We're likely exceeding $21,000 in special education costs. I'm sorry, per pupil education costs at Neshoba Tech for the current school year. So again, that's significant. I mean, heck, it's significant if you were looking to send a kid to college, $21,000 per year net cost. So, all right, their budget drivers are very similar to ours. Staff contractual increases, special education staffing services, they're hit with an increase as well to the Middlesex County retirement system. And also they've got costs for their buildings, grounds, and other capital needs because they're funding the whole operation. Moving into public safety, again, we're maintaining same ratio of 69 full-time officers, full-time employees, 54 sworn officers. The number of calls, as you can see on the next slide, are running around that 36,000 average, and this is per calendar year. Similarly with fire, we're maintaining the same employment with the fire department of 63 and a half full-time employees, 52 firefighters, 7 captains, a chief and a deputy chief, 11 firefighters per shift. And again, the fire calls are, again, that 6,000 range, where we've been, off and on the last several years. So again, looking at the drivers on the town side, employee pay schedules, our personnel increases for the non-union employees is 2.5%. For those that we have settled, we do have a settled contract with the police patrol. So at this point, our personnel increase in this budget is $860,000 because, again, we cannot pre-fund contracts. So what will happen is, and we'll discuss this when we talk about the warrant, there's an article to fund the labor agreement, but assuming that labor agreement gets funded at town meeting, which is the first action item, financial, this budgetary increase is for the subsequent year, so that is included in there. Moving on to employee and retiree health insurance, we don't have our final rates from Blue Cross Blue Shield. The range is noted as between 1 and 11%. The average is 5.8%. We expect to have those rates within the next week or so. Again, the swing in that is a couple $100,000 because you can see, the budgetary increase is just over $1 million. Some of that is known. The other part is not known. With the active employee plans or active retiree plans, those are on the fiscal year. The premiums for retiree plans are on the calendar year. So, and you can see our health insurance subscribers are shown there. We continue to grow in our number of retirees. We now have 949 retirees into this budget and 675 active employees. And that chart that John produced, John Souza, our finance director, produced, shows you the trend. And clearly we're seeing a trend in retirees. That's just the reality of it. So again, if you went back a decade, we would have 1,424 total health insurance subscribers. We're now up to 1,624 over that period. And the question of premiums, again, if you use an 8% premium increase, the town's cost of the 75% share of a family HMO plan is over $22,000 for the upcoming budgetary year. So even if that number goes down slightly, you're still in the high 21s, low 22, cost for the town's portion. Obviously, the employee pays 25% as well. Moving on to Middlesex retirement, the assessment, these are known numbers because the retirement board does a biennial reassessment, evaluation of the liabilities and the operatings of the retirement system. So we have our premiums for this year and next year. John Souza sits as the town's representative at the retirement board, and then I join him when I can to keep track of this very important expenditure for the town. But this increase is almost $800,000, or 7.5%. And then we know, as you can see at the bottom, the 25 assessment is going to go up another $745,000, or another 6.6%, to over $12 million. And then John produces this chart and updates it periodically. And really what's driving this is the payment on the unfunded liability, the fourth column. It's this upcoming fiscal year to be $9.6 million of the $11.3 million that we'll be funding. So again, and that liability is scheduled to be funded by 20. It's not that far out now. It's about 13 more years out, and we're only just over 50% funded in terms of the unfunded liability for the system. And again, a lot of that has been tempered by the fact that we're trying to use the system is trying to use realistic financial returns and updated tables in terms of life expectancy and so forth. So it's not as though they've been asleep at the switch. They've really been keeping the system current with what's happening in the real world. Solid waste and recycling, as I noted earlier in my comments, that's a big increase. We're up over $400,000, or a 21% increase. Portion of this is due to the increase in the disposal fee at the waste energy facility in Haverhill. That tipping fee is going up by 4% from $93 per 60 cents per ton of trash to over $97 per ton. So that will total 1.65. The remainder of the increase is for the collection of recycling and solid waste curbside materials. That increase is over $400,000, and that was bid by contract. We had 3 qualified vendors who bid. We awarded it to the lowest qualified vendor, but even that lowest qualified vendor was up 21% above our current cost. And if we had taken the next vendor, it was almost double that. And again, they're dealing with labor costs like everybody else. They're dealing with fuel costs, equipment costs, and so forth. The only good news is there are some additional benefits that were provided in that contract, such as we'll be converting to weekly recycling collection as opposed to biweekly recycling collection. And also we'll also be providing 5 brush and days per year. So at least that one, it takes some of the sting out of the increase. But we bid it all kinds of ways, with and without containers and so forth, and we took the most advantageous contract. Now you start moving into a little more of the fixed details of the budget. Property, casualty, workers' compensation insurance. Again, if anybody's following what's going on in the insurance markets, it's not very beneficial. So we projected a 5% increase of $50,000 for our premiums, and that appears to be sufficient based on what we're hearing from our providers. Medicare tax, that's tied to your payroll. So we're expecting about a 4.5% increase in total payroll, including all payroll earnings, again, with the base increases, wages, your step increases, and so forth. So we've increased that by over $50,000. I guess the good news is on debt service, as we've been highlighting during this presentation, Standard & Poor's rates us every year. They'll be rating us again this current June. They note the town's strong debt profile with moderate, medium-term debt plans. And that's as I noted at the select board when I met with them, that's because we haven't done a school project. And when that time comes, all that will get addressed. But the good news is we're really not adding excess or trivial debt. Our debt service excluded, which again is mostly the sewer projects, is decreasing by $400,000 for the upcoming year. However, as noted in the italicized language at the end of the page, this decline in excluded debt doesn't provide any operating budget relief because that debt service is only applied and is restricted to excluded debt. So when it goes away, it doesn't get transferred anywhere else. So you can see our excluded debt is down down below $1.7 million. And so that's good news because it does provide a little bit of moderation of the tax increase for the year ahead. Non-excluded debt is running rather constant, $7 million. And that's a decrease of $140,000 from fiscal '24. So again, that helps a little bit. Again, the idea of the full-time equivalent employees on this chart is through FY '23. I can tell you verbally the FY '24 on the town side, it's the same, 254.9. And as I mentioned earlier, the school department actually decreases by to 793.6. So roughly by three employees in that period. So again, things are holding constant. What he added, and you'll see it in the superintendent's presentation, they reduced the number of classroom teachers, I think particularly due to retirements, and because some of the high school enrollment is still down, but they did add some nursing and some support services for the students. Again, you start adding up all these budget drivers from the school department budget to health insurance, retirement, solid waste and so forth. We're up almost $6.7 million. You start looking at, well, what are our available revenue sources? As I noted, most of it's the property tax. This is the breakdown of the property tax. The allowed 2.5% increase is roughly $2.9 million. We're forecasting $1.7 million in new growth, and then we're applying the excess levy capacity that is available to the community, i.e. what we didn't tax the previous year. And then again, assuming state aid coming in at $775 and local receipts at $675, we're at roughly $6.4 million. I put the 5 and 10-year comparisons just to show what's happening over time, and as we've been talking about for years, the shift is going towards the property tax and away from state aid. So you can see the 5-year period, and then 10-year, the same trend is happening. So we're almost at 78% funded from the property tax. And again, the Chapter 70 funding has just been horrific in terms of funding for education. If for a 10-year period, you're up at 22%. That's below 2% on a compounded basis. It's just not sufficient with real education costs, particularly now in the inflationary market that we're in right now, where we're talking about how the state's granting 14% increases in special education tuitions, and so forth. A little into the property tax revenue, again, our increase is 4.57 per million. Again, utilizing the excess levy capacity would provide you to 5.35 million. Looking at what this means in terms of an average single-family tax bill of $82.35, which is out there, and in fact, the Department of Revenue released data on this today for communities across the Commonwealth. Our taxes, are high, but yet we're continuing to basically maintain the flow, meaning taxes are going up in Chelmsford, but they're going up everywhere. In our ranking, you'll see in a couple slides, is remaining unchanged. So we're relatively the norm in terms of what's happening. So there's nothing extraordinary happening in Chelmsford in terms of that we're overtaxing or having some issues of concern that are extraordinary to what's happening in the municipalities across the Commonwealth. Again, so if your tax bill is $82.35, you can see $3,700 of that would be towards the Chelmsford Public Schools, and you can see roughly 20% or almost $1,600 of it's for benefits and insurance. What's happening with valuations, and Sam is still not here, he's still down in the assessor's office dealing with abatement applications and such, is we're continuing to see this trend towards residential valuations. This past year, values went up 15% for residential properties, which is much greater than the commercial valuation increase. So you can see now we're over 84.5% residential valuation. And again, this is based on the calendar year's sales. So for fiscal 24, which is the upcoming fiscal year, we're relying on the calendar year sales in calendar year 2022. We know once again residential values exceeded that of commercial, so this is likely going to top 85% as we go into fiscal year '24. And again, here's the chart that I mentioned earlier, the key column being the right one in terms of state rank. We appear to maintain our ranking at 77, meaning number one being the town of Weston having the second highest, having the highest property tax bill in the Commonwealth. We're at 77, which again is pretty good standing from where we've been even over the, going back over the last 15 or so years. We've been around that 60, high 60s, 70 range. Property tax comparison, again, looking at the last couple of years where we are with Chelmsford versus our neighboring towns. And again, in Chelmsford was 406, as you can see the fourth column. The increase, the statewide increase was over $350. And Chelmsford being a rather high value community, again, shows you that what's happening here is not, an anomaly. You can see Barica really had a big increase of almost 10% because they're at full, tax classification shift, so they had nowhere to move. And then you can see, Tewksbury was 365 or almost 5%. Westford, now the tax bill is over $10,000 in the town of Westford, and they were up by 4.5% or over $440. State aid, again, this is an estimate. That's the key thing is we're estimating an increase in Chapter 70 and general government aid. Again, I don't expect these are the numbers you're going to see when the governor's budget comes out, but we're hopeful that the continued efforts will get us there before the legislature finishes the budget at the end of June, July. Local receipts, that we're holding solid there. And again, as noted, we're required by the Department of Revenue to budget these conservatively, and we have to justify any increases in numbers. John has, and you've received, if you had a vehicle for the past year, you've received your annual bill. Our revenues are holding solid on that. And I think it's probably what's driving it now is if people are going more towards leased vehicles and the manufacturer's suggested retail price of those vehicles is increasing, so you may have less market activity, but the value is still there. And again, the valuation schedule by the state is on a fixed schedule that they haven't changed in decades in terms of how a vehicle depreciates from the manufacturer's suggested retail price. So again, motor vehicle excise are holding solid. The other big one to note is permit fees. We believe that'll be $1.8 million. The big unknown on that is, and again, we're budgeting for a period that's going to start this July through June of 2024. The big wild card on that is the former UMass West Campus development. They are still in the Massachusetts Environmental Permitting Review. That could be completed at any time, and what we're hopeful is that once that's completed, they'll start pulling permits for the first phase of that project because clearly there's a housing market out there. But they can't begin that project until the state environmental reviews are completed. And again, we're holding solid on meals tax. Even this current year's numbers are running solid. Probably that's because two things. One is the price of food and meals are going up, honestly. And then, of course, we just opened Press Cafe, so we think that will help us, too. And the other thing with rooms tax is, the room tax is being paid and utilized by the state because they're sheltering people in the hotels in the community, and so that is why those numbers are saying in what otherwise a rather downward tourism cycle. Available funds that I mentioned earlier, these are what available funds consist of, and you can see there's not much change there. A lot of this is sewer betterments, but again, that's $2.3 million, but it's only an $11,000 decrease. Sewer enterprise funds and child care funds, a lot of these are tentative numbers because, again, those offsets depend upon their health insurance costs. And so when that rate comes in, those numbers will move slightly. And then the big thing is inflation. And through November, the number was 7%. I just saw the numbers today through January at 6.4%. But the key thing is inflation is running at extraordinary levels that we haven't seen in decades, and that is constraining us. So in summary, what can we do to deal with this? Well, we got to keep pushing the state to increase Chapter 70 education fundings to a level that is beyond the nominal amounts of $30 per student, which didn't keep pace with inflation prior to the surge in inflation, never mind where it is now. And then Chapter 90, you know, a disappointing thing that we did see from the governor, one of her first announcements was that she was filing a Chapter 90, two-year Chapter 90 roadway funding bill. So we give communities, you know, the ability to get out and on time this spring and then have certainty for the next year. The problem is she level funded it at the same level for the past decade at $200 million statewide, which is only, you know, which again is only buying about, you know, 60 cents on the dollar that you had a decade ago, and it's really only about a third of the amount needed to maintain our roadway infrastructure. So again, we're hopeful there, and that's why the town has supplemented, you know, with money in its roads budget. And then, again, the other big thing, and there's no sign of this one happening either on the horizon, is the other post-employment benefits reform, because that's a driving cost, and it's as healthcare costs increase, the OPEB goes up with it. So that's sort of an overview of the operating budget. Do you want to go now towards the capital and then come back on the warrant? Is that what we want to do? Okay, so I'll turn it over to John Souza, our finance director, and John will review the capital plan to the community. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Finance Committee. Back in December at the Tri-Board, provided you with a summary, a very brief sort of overview of the capital plan at that time. So tonight, what I'd like to do is just we'd like to go a little more in depth for you, give you a better understanding of the plan. So the Capital Planning Committee had its work cut out this year. They reviewed 30 projects totaling $6.77 million. And after reviewing all those projects in detail, they voted to recommend 17 projects, defer 10, and then 3 were withdrawn. This slide just shows it pretty much broken out by functional area, and you can see that the most significant investments here in the areas of public works, and then if you take public facilities and school buildings together, that's a significant investment. The 17 projects, as you see, total $4.38 million. If we deduct recaptured funds of $225,000 or so, these are from prior year completed projects. The net amount that we would be looking to borrow would be $4.16 million. If we go on to the next slide, we'll start to take a look at these projects in a little more detail. The first year is municipal technology, or the 2 projects recommended this year. The first one is a security camera upgrade for $118,000. You can see that the goal is to upgrade all the police department cameras and also add some cameras at some of the fire substations, as well as a couple of other locations in town. The other technology-related project is a continuation of our move to transition a number of door security systems from municipal buildings to an electronic system. And this would be to add Public Works, the Senior Center, the North Town Hall, and the CCA at a cost of $75,000. Moving on to municipal administration, this is titled under the town clerk because she's been leading this effort. It really benefits a number of departments and town offices. She was actually seeking more money. What we were able to fund is $160,000 to convert 2 record storage areas to a dry fire suppression system here in the town office building. And the reason for that is when the fire suppression system was first upgraded to this building several years ago, when the fire station was constructed nearby, these storage areas were not used exclusively for records, so they have a standard, water-based system. So the first part of this project is to really convert that fire suppression system so that in the event of a fire or another event or freezing weather or what have you, the water would not damage all of the records in those areas. So that's the goal of that project, and the cost is $160,000. Moving on to our public libraries. Many will be familiar with this. If you drive down Boston Road, there's $100,000 recommended to reconstruct a retaining wall that runs along the sidewalk right near Boston Road, and it's between the sidewalk and the parking lot, the main parking lot for Adams Library. Many of us still think the library addition is new. In reality, it was over 20 years ago, and what's happened is the retaining wall is pushing out and needs to be completely reconstructed and redesigned. So that's the goal of that project. Moving on to fire department, there are 2 vehicle replacements planned. First is a fire investigation vehicle. You can see that there's an older sedan that will be replaced with a different type of vehicle. That's at a cost of $68,000, as well as a service and rescue truck that's an older vintage truck that's going to be replaced at a cost of just under $112,000, shown on the right-hand side. Moving on to Public Works, the first two projects deal with traditional infrastructure, sidewalk improvements for $350,000, as well as road improvements for $400,000. As the town manager said in his presentation, recognizing that Chapter 90 does not fund adequate funding to keep our roads improved, this capital funding is necessary each year to supplement that. Moving on, the next project in Public Works is a cost of $215,000, and this is to allow the Highway Department to purchase a truck body, a sander truck body, and also add brining equipment to their fleet for de-icing operations. The goal of this, you may have heard of it in other communities, is that during a de-icing operation, you apply a brine or salt water liquid to the road before, and it actually reduces the amount of rock salt that you need to use, which is becoming more expensive every year. Next project under Public Works is to fund $150,000 to fund the design work necessary for the rehabilitation of the School Street Bridge that runs over Stony Brook. You can see a photo of it there. There were some deficiencies noted in a inspection report. So this is kind of a two-part project. This will fund the design work, and in future years, we will be seeking money to actually do the rehabilitation, reconstruction of the bridge. Then we move on to municipal facilities. There's one project planned, and it's actually the replacement of the elevator in this building, the town offices. It was recommended for replacement by our maintenance contractor, and it's important that we keep this elevator functioning well because it does provide the only ADA accessible route to the second floor where we're actually meeting and to other areas of the building. And that's at a cost of $480,000. And then we transition to school facilities. So we'll go through these basically by school. The first is $316,000 to fund the replacement of boilers at the Harrington Elementary School. The current, and you can see that it replaces some older boilers that date back to 2002. And then we go to the Westlands Community Ed Center, $189,750 will fund some HVAC upgrades for Westlands, including some work on air handling units, hot water branch piping and valves, and some ductwork improvements. Another project plan for Westlands is the elevator replacement. It is pretty much, it goes back, as you can see, over 33 years. Many of the parts and components are no longer manufactured. The cost for that elevator is going to be $325,000. Then we move to the high school. We have $207,000 recommended as additional funding for the replacement of the boilers. You may recall that in this current year's capital plan, town meeting approved $325,000 for the purchase, actually for the replacement of boilers at the high school. What we experienced is significant inflation for both labor and the actual equipment. And so the original appropriation will cover the cost of the boilers. They have been purchased, but this extra funding is necessary for the demolition and installation of the new units. Also for the high school, an elevator replacement is planned. You can see this elevator is about 48 years old. The cost is $480,000. And as you know, if you've ever visited the high school, this is the only elevator that services the high school, and it receives very heavy use daily. Moving on, the next project at the high school, this is part of the school department's efforts to remodel and upgrade a number of their kitchens at all their locations. And the next one on the list is the high school. The $641,000 will provide new equipment, non-slip flooring, and upgrades to the kitchen equipment, similar to what's been done at other schools. So that pretty much is a look at all the projects. As many of you know, the next step will be for town meeting to consider the capital plan at spring town meeting. And the last slide is just a summary of all of the projects. If anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer those.
Anybody have any questions?
So I'll move on to an overview of the 2023 Spring Annual Town Meeting warrant. The Select Board is scheduled to sign the warrant on the 27th of this month. They've seen 3 drafts at this point, and so it's pretty much in a final form. What I can tell you is there's 30 articles, and the good news is, again, there's nothing difficult that I hope to understand in the warrant. It's pretty much your typical spring annual town meeting warrant, where we deal with the traditional layout. I mean, the start with the reports of officers and committees, as is every town meeting. We're going to amend amendments to the current fiscal year operating budget when Darlene, John, and I meet with department heads. As we near the town meeting, in terms of how are we going to get, how are we sitting to get through the end of the fiscal year. There's nothing catastrophic. It's just, the typical waxes and wanes of what happens in a budget that you're preparing, 6 months in advance to a fiscal year, and then what happens in reality and unexpected retirements and costs and issues that arise. Then we'll fund collective bargaining agreements. As I mentioned earlier, we have an agreement that's been approved by the Patrol Officers Union and the Select Board that we'll be bringing to town meeting for funding. And we're hopeful to bring others. We're in negotiations with the dispatchers, the library union, and we're at impasse, I guess, with the firefighters union at this point, and there's no movement towards a new agreement at this point with the police superior officers or sergeants union. So after that article is acted upon, we'll go to the Neshoba Valley Technical School District assessment, then the public schools operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year, then the general departments of the town operating budget, and then, as custom, to the Finance Committee Reserve Fund, which I think we'd leave level funded for the year. Then we go to the capital budget that John just presented, and then we start getting into the enterprise budgets of the town sewer enterprise, including one capital on sewer, which is the upgrade of the Milan Avenue sewer pump station. And then we go into the stormwater management enterprise budget, the forum enterprise, the PEG access, the local access and cable-related operating budget, and the golf course. Nothing extraordinary in these budgets other than the annual, adjustments for pay scales and so forth. Then we do the annual authorizations we're required under state law for departmental revolving funds, again, unchanged. Then we do the cemetery improvement and development fund, which is an article at every town meeting. Again, nothing material here, just the ongoing work in the cemetery. Community Action Program Fund, the annual $10,000 appropriation for the community action projects. And then we get into one bylaw change and a couple zoning bylaw changes. The general bylaw changes is an action that's necessary to basically set new rates for the sale of weights and measures inspection fees. This service is provided to the town by the Northern Middlesex Council of Government, so we deal with the regional planning agency, and they provide this service to a number of towns in the NIMCOG, Northern Middlesex Council of Government region, and we need to adopt our own pay schedule to move off of the state schedule because it just doesn't meet the true cost of hiring a person and going out and doing the work. The next article is a zoning bylaw amendment regarding non-conforming uses and structures to allow them for a special permit. This is still under active consideration by the planning board and will be, I think its final hearing on that is on a week from yesterday or this coming Wednesday, the 22nd. Again, that and the next one, which is the single and two-family reduction of dimensional requirements, will be discussed and acted upon and presented to you from the planning board once this is finalized. And then the next one is a proposal from the Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee, and this is to enact a specialized energy code for the design and construction of buildings. As you may know, we've been a green community since 2009, and we're part, along with 300 other communities across the Commonwealth, with the stretch code, which is the energy code in the state building code. There's now an additional opt-in that requires additional vote, and it really only applies, and I saw a presentation on this 2 days ago, it really only applies for new single-family homes above 4,000 square feet and for commercial renovations and new construction, which basically provides them with a higher energy standard. And what it's really requiring them to do is push towards electrification, is what it does. Is it requires, for example, those structures would have to be pre-wired for full electrification at a future date, and you have to have higher energy performance measures if you go with a mixed use, meaning you've wired it for electricity, but you still have a fossil fuel, most commonly natural gas as a fuel source. You have higher standards to meet, as well as pre-wiring for electric vehicles and so forth. So again, that will be explained. I imagine you probably have the committee come in. I expect they'll present to the select board, they'll present to you, and then certainly they're going to present to town meeting. And then we get into the Community Preservation Fund, mostly to finish the warrant. And this year, the Community Preservation Fund has a number of small projects, which is a little atypical in terms of the number. But the first one is always funding the debt service for previously approved projects that were funded by borrowing, the general admin budget and the reserves required under the state law. And then we get into a series of articles regarding the expenditure of community preservation funds. One is to acquire a parcel off of Wilson Lane that was approved. These have all been approved and recommended by the Community Preservation Committee. In fact, the one on Wilson Lane was presented last night to the Community Preservation Committee in great detail by the Conservation Commission. It's a 1.34 acre parcel that is adjacent to town-owned conservation land along Stony Brook. The cost is like $30,000. We're not talking material in terms of land values for this one. And then we get into capital improvements on conservation land, which is Article 24, which is putting funding in there. And then the next one is I put this one, which is not a community preservation one, but I put it with the conservation articles. This is the Conservation Commission proposing to grant an easement to the owner of Two Shore Drive for the purpose of a driveway. And what this is, and you'll see the map when it's provided at town meeting, and we'll get it to you in advance with the warrant. Basically, there's an existing driveway, you've heard this story before, that runs across conservation land that's been there for years, and now obviously when the people do these title examinations and so forth, they're like, oh, what do we do here? So it's not impacting any of the conservation values of the property, but we have to grant that. So that's what's taking place here over at Two Shore Drive. And then there's an article for historic records preservation. And this has to do with the records themselves, not the vaults that John described in the Capitol Party. This is actually dealing with the vital records preservation. And then there's the replacement of the playground equipment at Highland Playground off of John Street. It's probably the more, even though we call it Highland Playground, it's because it was the old Highland School, but it's really located off of John Street in that area. And then there's funding for the preservation of headstones at Forefathers Cemetery. And then there's funding for the Center Village Brook Walk along Beaver Brook behind where the construction's taking place at the old Oddfellows building. That the conservation last night just approved the easement for the portion that's owned by the private property owner, and we're seeking funding to do the work along with the municipal parking area that the town now owns back there. And then there's the last one is the School Street Freight House, which will be the dismantling, transporting, and preservation costs to relocate that structure, which is pretty dilapidated if you go by the freight house now on School Street to move it over to the Garrison House property on Garrison Road. So again, that's the summary of the warrant. Again, it's scheduled to be signed on the 27th of this month, a week from this coming Monday. And my sense is two-night town meeting.
It's not going to be more than one.
It's going to be more than one. I'm hopeful it's 2 nights, starting, on the 24th and then hopefully finishing on the 27th. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right,
members of the
thank you.
committee.
Moving right along in our agenda this evening, we have the reorganization, discussion, and vote. We can do this right now, or I know Sam is not currently here, so we're missing one member. But I leave it to the committee if you want to table this till next week, or if you'd like to proceed this evening.
let's proceed.
Okay,
I say proceed to.
okay. So there are two standard positions that we have that we vote on each year. The first is chair, the second is vice chair. So I'll take open nominations for chair.
I nominate Jim Clancy for chair.
I second that.
Are there any other nominations? Any other nomination?
Your?
Okay, hearing no further nominations, I will close nominations and entertain a motion.
I
Jim, are you
move
willing
that,
to serve again?
I'm sorry?
Are you willing to serve as chairman once again?
What's another year? I think we're at 7 now. Certainly, John. Yes. Thank you.
I make a motion to reelect Jim Clancy as chairman of the finance committee.
I second that motion.
Any discussion? Hearing none. We'll do a roll call vote only because we're on Zoom. Well, mostly on Zoom. Anita?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Cindy?
Aye.
Sam is absent, and I'm abstaining. All right. That portion's closed. I'll open for nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Anita Tanini for vice chair.
I second it.
Any other nominations? Hearing none, close that portion. I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion to elect Anita Tanini as vice chair of the finance committee.
Do a
I
second.
second.
I'll do a roll call vote. John?
Yes.
David?
Aye.
Kathy?
Yes.
Cindy?
Aye.
Anita?
I'll abstain.
And I will vote aye, and Sam is absent. All right. It's like Groundhog Day. All right.
We thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda this evening, we have a review and discussion of the liaison assignments for the fiscal year 2024 budget review. So I emailed the list from last year to everyone. And so what this will do is base who meets with whom regarding individual departmental reviews. So all I'm going to do is just go down the list as it is and see if the people that are there still want to serve as liaison, or if someone wants to add on or change, and go from there. So the first I have is the Board of Health, meeting with Susan Rosa. Anita, do you want to continue doing that?
Yes, please.
Okay, does anyone else want to join Anita? Okay. Capital planning, we've already had, and thank you very much for your service on that board. David, you've done your due diligence and your duty. We've heard the capital plan this evening, so we'll just leave you sitting in that nice little location on that chart. For the cemetery, meeting with David Boyle. David, you want to continue doing that?
Absolutely. Future home.
Oh, jeez. Okay, well, that's a good way to look at it.
Jesus.
Well, we're moving right along. Chelmsford Public Schools, meeting with Dr. Lang and Joanna M. Johnson Collins and the school committee. last year was Kathy, David, and Sam. Can certainly continue with that, or if anyone wants to join them, or anyone wants to step
I
off.
definitely want to continue with the
You do?
school
Okay.
department.
David, you want to continue with us with the CPS?
Be more than happy to.
Okay. And Sam doesn't get an option because he's not here, so he's going to stay on there. Community Preservation Fund. Kathy, you've met with them in the past. If you'd like to continue to do that.
I'm happy to continue. I'm happy to continue, yeah.
Okay.
I just was thinking, like, I don't know if anybody wants to mix anything up, or I don't know what Cindy's, which people Cindy is gonna be meeting with, but I'm happy to mix up, but I'm happy also to continue. Linda's great, and I enjoy that very much.
Okay.
So, I mean, I can either, yeah, there's a couple of empty spots here I'm noticing,
Yep.
Jim. So I wasn't sure if you were planning on dropping my name in there. I mean, I don't want to sign up to partner with somebody if you had an intention.
Oh, no, no intention. What's missing there is Eric was on the committee last year. Yeah, he ended his 3-year term at the end of the fiscal year last year. So he's dropped off. And then there's 2 particular departments for which I have stepped off of. And I will not be doing the review of those departments, and we'll get to those shortly. But that's not to suggest, Cindy, that you should do those. It's just those that are currently available only because somebody else was doing them last year. It's not doing them this year.
Okay.
Okay. So Kathy, I'll leave you there for now.
Excellent.
Senior Center, David, you want to stay there? I mean, that's the stop before the cemetery, so.
Might as well.
I beat you to the punch on that one. DPW, Waste, Sewer, and Storm. Meeting with Christine Clancy. I will not be reviewing the budget this year for various reasons. So who would like to? Usually, the last few years, actually, it was myself and Eric. So we usually sent 2 people to sit and review and go through that. So if there are 2 people that would like to do that this year, happy to fill you in on that.
I can step in on that.
Sure.
And I'll go with Cindy. That's,
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
you want to,
Excellent.
All right. Financing, the Finance Department and Accounting. Well, actually, it's the Finance Department, which covers accounting, assessors, information technology, and the Treasury and Collection. So that's meeting obviously with John Souza, with Darlene, with Frank Reen, with Ted Lutter, on those various departments. Anita, you've done that with John the past couple of years. Do you guys want to continue doing that?
I'm happy to hand that over. Only we need 2 people on it. John
Okay.
wants to take it all.
No, thank you.
Was that a no thank you or a thank you?
I'm not home till April 13th, so I'm not going to be of much help.
Okay, well, we've done Zoom meetings in the past if that works for the department head. So what I would say is that is a possibility based upon when they can and if they're able to meet that way. So what I will do is keep you on there, John, for now. But
That's fine.
if someone wants to join that, I don't know if Anita, you're looking to, because you're adding on a different one. I don't know if Cindy you'd like to meet.
I can stay if you want.
So I could. I also noticed the public facilities with Christine is also open. So I thought
Yep.
that I would grab those 2.
Sure.
It seems like they go hand in hand.
They do go hand in hand, and it's a meeting with Christine and also Kathleen Canavan if she's available to meet as well regarding
Okay.
that. So, yeah, sure. So, Anita, I'll keep you on there with John for now, and then we can always adjust this table. For fire department, I will jump on with Gary for review. I don't know if that needs more than one person. It can, but I can certainly do it. If anyone else wants to join, let me know. Library, Kathy, you've done that for many years. You'd like to continue doing that?
Yes. Do you know who I should be meeting with this year?
I think currently, I believe Vicky Turcott and Leslie Kimball.
Yep, co-directors.
As
yeah.
the co-directors. Unfortunately, as we all know, Becky Herman passed away in a terrible situation, and so it'll be a change this year, obviously, from many years prior. But they are currently acting as co-directors, and so you'd be meeting with them.
Okay, thank you.
Neshoba Valley District, so we've got David and Sam. There's typically been a third. Eric was last year. I know Kathy, in previous years you've gone, but in the last couple of years you've stepped down from meeting on that particular budget.
Yes. That's...
I don't know, Cindy, would you be interested in joining the group?
I could do that, sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Sam has done pay access and cable the last year or so, so we'll keep that. And then I've met with Chief Spinney, so I'll continue to do that. Public facilities, that'll now be Anita and Cindy. And that'll be the same day. You'll knock it all out at once. And then we all obviously meet with the town manager. We've gone through the preliminary budget and the warrant articles. And then Veteran Services, Anita, do you want to continue meeting with Regina?
Yes, I look forward to it every year.
Excellent, okay. As far as warrant articles are concerned, there are a number of CPC articles that Kathy, you'll talk with the group about. I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 this year. Oh yes, a number of articles to go over. As far as other articles, really it's the planning board for their 2 zoning bylaw amendments. I don't know, Anita, you can speak a little bit more to that if you want to. But we'll have, yeah, no, you don't. We'll have the planning board come and present once those have been reviewed and approved. And then as far as the bylaw for specialized energy code, we'll have them come in and give a presentation. I saw they gave a presentation this past Monday, was it? Regarding a portion of what they were, well, not a full presentation, but a portion of what they're looking to do with that particular bylaw amendment. All right. So that sets us for our different liaisons. What I will ask you to do is, as soon as you're able, to reach out to your liaison assignments and your appointments, so we can start meetings with them and get a schedule in for when we can meet back here for our review. Ideally, I'd like to continue next week with our first set of reviews, and then what we will do, as we typically do, is skip the first Thursday in the month of March, and that's because the Zoning Board of Appeals meets at the same time, and with a hybrid system, this is the room to do it live. And so they'll be using this room for their meeting. We will meet next week, hopefully, and then in 2 weeks, and then the next couple of weeks. So let's bring up the next part of the agenda, is the schedule. Okay. So we'll have our budget hearings through March, depending on how often or how many of them we need to hold. We've had the presentation of the draft warrant articles and the budget tonight. Between March 17th and the 23rd, Pam will start putting the book together with the budget, receiving the budget materials and getting things together. We'll really need to vote somewhere in the 23rd to 30 range on the warrant articles. And as we typically do, we usually try to do that all in one evening. As far as the last date for warrant article recommendations, it has to be April 6th in order to meet town meeting. So between March 17th and April 7th is when really Pam will be putting everything together, getting the revised articles together, and getting our votes into the book. Then we'll provide the draft on the 8th, and final letter and comments will be due by the 10th. The final book will be delivered to the printer and posted on the town website by the 11th at the absolute latest. And then usually it's about the 14th that the books will get there. And finally, as everyone knows, town meeting begins on April 24th.
John, to interrupt, do you want to skip that April 6th meeting because of the conflict with the Board of Appeals?
That's the last day for recommendations,
Okay.
but I don't think that we'll have a
We
meeting
probably won't need it?
that
Okay,
evening.
okay, all right.
Yeah,
I just
I
wanted to
really
put-
do
okay.
think it'll be,
Done
have to be
before that.
wrapped up. Hi, Sam, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Congratulations on being new chair, Sam.
And you know, if that happened, I would know exactly who instigated that. I'm looking right at her, okay?
You weren't here, Sam.
Yeah, no?
That happened to me 15 years ago at the Board of Assessors. That's okay.
All right. And I've lost my agenda here. Okay.
Meeting dates.
Yep, so we've gone through the timeline. As I said, the meeting dates are going to be next week. Then we'll have a break in between for the zoning Board of Appeals meeting, and then we'll meet the next 3 Thursdays. And by the last Thursday, we're going to have our votes in. It may be quick. We may come sooner, so who knows? But that final night, at least with there being 30 warrant articles and a lot of them being returning and revolving articles, I don't think it's going to be huge heavy lifting. But you know, famous last words. So we'll see what happens.
Pretty straightforward this time.
Pretty straightforward. Yep. Okay. Is there any public comment?
The only comment I'll point out, just information for you, is at the next select board meeting on the 27th of this month, a week from Monday, there will be the financial audit presentation for fiscal year 2022 and the other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, liability presentation. So if you're able to attend that, we'll send you the documents in advance of the meeting, but obviously John, Darlene, and I will be there, and sneak preview, it's a good report, as usual. So it's a good, no, but I just
Thank
wanted you
you.
to be aware of it, that's online and, or we, on queue, and we'll get that to you in advance. And again, you're welcome to watch the meeting if you, or be in person if you have any questions or concerns, but it's, as typical, it's a very good report.
Excellent. And then the warrant article will be signed that evening.
Yes, the warrant will be signed as well.
Do we anticipate any adjustments to the warrant in
No,
between now and then?
no, just whatever legal review council has, and whatever the planning board finally wraps up its review, which is next week.
Okay.
And they usually wait to make their recommendations after FinCom has.
Right, but the whole idea is, remember, we want to get the wording in the warrant as
Oh, I
opposed to having
understand.
different language, so
Yep.
we're hoping that, that gets wrapped up next week.
Good.
Excellent. All right. Seeing no other public comments and not seeing any press questions. Oh, hold on 1 second.
Spoke too soon.
I did speak too soon. Okay. So I'll keep it open for public comment. We do have one person in the Zoom room, although I don't know if they're open for public comment or not. Unfortunately, there's no
They're not signaling.
sound, yeah. All right. Well, I'll proceed with closing public comment. Press questions. There is none, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, seconds?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, everyone. See you next week.